Hi everyone. We would like to thank you for the audit committee giving us the opportunity to work on this interesting lease arrangement case. Our audit team consists of three members: myself, Mingze, Saleem, and Shirley. Firstly, let me introduce the background of this case. Logical Logistics Company provides transportation and logistics services to customers throughout a network to offices in North America, South America, and Asia. The company has entered into the following contracts with the four vendors identified below. The first one is the truck company. It provides the truck. The second one is fly by air. It provides the airplane. The third one is warehouse company. It provides the place. And the fourth one is seaboat. It provides cargo ship. Under the new lease standard, there are two issues. The first one is determining whether each of logical logistics vendor contracts contains an identified asset. The second one is determine whether each contract conveys the right to control the use of the identified asset to the lessee. And then my group member will analyze two issues. Please, Shirley.
Hello, everybody. I would like to analyze the issue number 1, determine whether each of logical logistics vendor contracts contains an identified asset. According to the FASB codification 842-10-15-9, it illustrates the identified asset. An identified asset is identified by being explicitly specified in a contract. However, an asset also can be identified by being implicitly specified at the time that the asset is made available for use by the customer. And we assessed the terms and the conditions of all the container contracts the company has with its four vendors, and then we figure out whether the underlying asset is identified in the contract. So first one is seaboat. In the seaboat's contract, we think that it has identified assets. According to the codification, it states that although the contract explicitly states the asset, a substantial substitution test must be applied to determine whether the owner has such rights. Seaboats has dedicated a specific ship to be used by the company, and the name of the vessel is SB0829. Seaboats cannot substitute the identified asset with another ship in this fleet. And the second is fly by air, the identified asset. According to the codification, it requires that the explicit assets have no substantial substitution rights from the supplier, because the logical logistics determines the logistics of the assets without any restriction from the supplier. In this case, the fly-by-air has identified the aircraft which will be used in transporting goods by air. The name of the aircraft is FBA1231. This aircraft cannot be changed by fly-by-air. The third one is trucking company. The codification requires that the supplier has no substantial substitution rights, but the trucking company does have those rights. Besides, the supplier can change the asset anytime and to fulfill the request, and can use available space for its use. Thus, neither explicitly nor implicitly specifies the asset that will be used to deliver the company's shipments. The fourth is warehouse company. We think it has identified assets because according to the codification, the warehouse code does not have substantial replacement rights to move inventory to other facilities or use the logical logistics storage for other storage requirements. Thus, a warehouse is specifically identified to be used to store company's goods. Now let's welcome Saleem to analyze the issue number 2.
Hello everyone. After my team member explained issue number 1, now we are analyzing issue number 2. So under issue number 2, issue number 2 says that determine whether each contract conveys the right to control the use of the identified asset to the lessee. So the FASB codification ACCT633-10-15-4, it states that to determine whether a contract conveys the right to control the use of an identified asset for a period of time, an entity shall assess whether throughout the period of the use the customer has both of the following. The first one is the right to obtain substantially all economic benefits from the use of the asset, and the second one is the right to direct the use of the identified asset. So right to obtain substantially all economic benefits and right to direct the use of the identified assets. Now in the coming slides we are going to look at each company and their contracts with Logical Logistics and figure out if indeed these two conditions are met, and so that we can determine if the contract conveys the right from the vendors to the customer, which is Logical Logistics. The first company is Seaboat Company. So Seaboat Company, after reading the terms of the contract, we have determined that the contract does not convey the right to direct the use of the asset, and it is because the company will the contract is only specifying goods that the contract is specifying specific goods that the Logical Logistics will be able to use to transport the ship, and the Logical Logistics is not able to determine or make a decision about the arrival or departure of the ship. The crew of the Seaboat is controlling the speed, the route, and everything is controlled by the Seaboat. The company's treated just like another company. The Logical Logistics is treated just like another company who is using a service contract. It is not treated like is not given the rights so that we can determine if rights are conveyed so that it can direct the use of the identified asset. And the second one is the fly-by-air. In case of fly-by-air, we have determined that the contract conveys the right to control the use of identified asset to the lessee, and it's because the contract gives fly-by-air exclusive right to use the aircraft, and even if the if there is unused space in the aircraft, the Logical Logistics gets to decide how to use it. Fly-by-air is not does not have the right to intervene and to say, hey, we are going to use the unused space for other purposes. And fly-by-air, there is one case that the fly-by-air prevents the company from shipping flammable materials. However, this is only a protective rights that is given to fly-by-air according to ASC 842.10.15.23. It is just giving the fly-by-air a protective right. It is not restricting the customer or the Logical Logistics to use the company, to use the contract and to use the aircrafts. The third one is the trucking company. After evaluating the trucking company, we have determined that contract does not convey the right to control the use of identified asset, and it's because the trucking company has a substantive right to substitute the truck, and they do that without incurring additional costs, without giving any prior notice to the Logical Logistics. it is therefore we determined that the company does not direct the use of identified asset. Indeed, it is the trucking company that direct the use of the asset. And not only that, but also when you read the terms of the contract, there is no an asset cannot be identified, which is one of the conditions that should be met in order for a contract to be considered a lease. And the fourth one is a warehouse company. In case of warehouse company, the contract conveys the right to control the use of identified asset to the lessee, and it is because the company or the logical logistics gets to decide, which shipping pallets or which goods to use or to ship, or which goods to remove, when to remove it. The supplier is not able to, or the supplier or the warehouse company is not able to use the unused space, and the supplier cannot relocate the shipping pallets to another warehouse. So it is therefore that the logical logistics has the right to obtain substantially all economic benefits from the use of the identified asset, and also it has the company has the right to direct the use of the asset, because even though the ship will not be fully used, the company still gets to decide what to do with unused space. Now, the next section is the new lease standard implication. What will be the implication of the new lease standard on this case in general, and on the lessee in particular? So under accounting standard codification 842.10.20, a lease is defined as a contract or a part of a contract that conveys the right to control the use of an identified asset for a period of time in exchange for consideration. So here, in this new definition, the right to control is given a lot of importance, and the focus is that the lessee should have the right to control an identified asset. If a lessee does not have the right to control an identified asset, then a contract will be considered maybe a service contract or something else. It will not contain a lease. And in terms of the financial statement and disclosure impacts, this will have the new lease standard will have a tremendous impact on the financial statements of the lessee. In this case, the logical logistics. Logical logistics will have to provide in-depth disclosure to its stakeholders, and will have to debit its assets and credit its liabilities on its balance sheet and show it on its balance sheet. Versus in the past, companies were not doing this. Companies would go out of their ways to classify a lease as an operating lease versus a finance lease, so as to avoid showing the liabilities on their balance sheets. But now, per this new standard, companies are required to show all the liabilities and assets on their balance sheets. Now, the next part is the conclusion part, and Mingze will come back, and he is going to provide a conclusion of our case.
Thank you, Saleem. About the conclusion, the first one, we conclude that only the contracts of fly-by-air and warehouse company with logical logistics conveys the right to control the use of the identified asset to the lessee, logical logistics. As a result, only these two contracts include a lease. For the second one, the contracts of logical logistics with trucking company and seaboat didn't convey the right to control the use of the identified asset to logical logistics. For the last part of our presentation, financial statement and disclosure impacts, the new lease standard under ASC 842 will require the lessee logical logistics to debit assets and credit liabilities on its balance sheet. In other words, these new transactions will affect its balance sheet. Thank you.